Hey guys, it's Leo Stargazer. I'm here with our weekly astrological reading. This is for the week of July 30th through August 5th. And this week, we were mainly following the moon. We had a full moon in Aquarius, and we also had Mercury entering its pre-retrograde shadow. And those were the two main features of the week. We hardly had any transits. We had a couple on the day of the full moon, but besides, and we'll go into that on that specific day. But besides that, I think the key for me this week was the full moon in Aquarius and Mercury entering its pre-retrograde shadow. The other thing was that we, as I said earlier, we were kind of following the moon through the elements. This week was really a journey with the moon through, it started in Capricorn, so Earth, and then we moved into Aquarius, where we had the full moon in an air sign. Then we moved from Aquarius into Pisces, where we entered water, began to talk about flow. And then we went from water to fire once the moon moved into Aries. So this week we had all four elements, journeyed through those elements with the moon, had a full moon along the way, and started to focus a little on Mercury too. So that's what I want to focus on in our weekly reading. The way that I see this week and the way that I am going to approach this week is by focusing on balance and flow. And what I mean by balance is the balance between and with passion and a detail-oriented focus. This week has kind of called for both. But both of those things are only going to help us if we can figure out the balance with that. The only way that's going to be helpful is if we're going with the flow. So we want to focus on how we approach details this week. We want to start engaging in a little bit of a review, at least a reflection on how we approach the details of our lives. The specifics of our consciousness, the specifics of our focus, that stuff is going to be, especially this month, is going to really be calling on us to engage with. So but in my eyes, even if we are engaging beautifully with details and we're, Mercury's on our side and we're totally loving Virgo and we're in all those moments, we have tons of planets there or something, or maybe you're Virgo ascendant, and whatever it is, I think that even if we're in that flow, if we aren't also balancing that part of us out or that part of our journey out with a focus on injecting passion into every aspect of this week, then I don't think we're going to be able to maintain the balance we need or to learn the lessons we need to learn for Mercury in retrograde coming up, before Mercury stations retrograde. Its pre-retrograde shadow started this week, or it will start this week. And the best way I can see to engage with that is by figuring out how we best deal with details as we are now. Again, hearkening back to the full moon in Aquarius, I really want us to focus on our unique sensibilities. I want us to focus on letting the full moon reveal to us our most unique selves, and then owning that, almost locking into that. But because this is about reflection and review, and August really is. We start August this week. The full moon was on August. It will be on August 1st. August is going to be a month of review. And so I really think that balancing the detail-oriented approach with a sense of passion, almost like passion in the details, whatever that could mean, let's start to engage with what that means for us. We don't have to lock into that because we'll already have locked into our unique sense of self with this full moon. But let's start looking at how passion in the details can help us go with the flow. This week's readings and this weekly reading may come off as kind of confusing. It may come off as a little bit contradictory. But I think if we're analyzing those contradictions, that's what I mean by going with the flow. That's how I want the full moon to help us out the most this week, is by shining a light on our uniqueness, beginning a review of how detail and passion combine to create balance, but only to inform how we go with the flow. This is all about preparation and reflection this week. It starts out with an idea of locking into self-trust, to self-acceptance, to our own unique perspective. And then it shifts from, once we own that, it shifts from that into a place of saying, okay, well now let's review in detail how we bring passion into our lives. How we bring a passion for details into the flow. What does that look like? So because that can be confusing, we need a guide. Okay, so this week for my major arcana card, I chose the World. I'm talking a lot about balance. I'm talking a lot about all four elements. I'm talking about flow and kind of self-understanding. Also about the completion of an understanding of our own unique sensibilities. So the major arcana spread, you'll see, utilizes the four elements. It does that through 4 signs in the zodiac, which you will also see. They're not the same ones that the moon went through this week, but it is all 4 elements, and I think their representations are beautiful in this spread. So let's get started on that. My intention for the week is inward balance. If you remember, I've been talking a lot about balance, details, and passion, and outward unity. And I think if we can bring that balance into flow, we can help unite all of these elements in our own lives. And that's going to help us help others as well. So let's start the reading. So today I'll be using the Marseille deck. I wanted to use the Marseille deck for the weeks of August, not only because I relate to the color palette this month. I also wanted to try to broaden the meanings of each card in a specific kind of way. I'm talking a lot this week about going with the flow, but also details, but also passion. So I wanted to kind of have I wanted to choose a deck that would give me a broader approach to the interpretations. And I do usually maintain a broader approach to the interpretations with the Marseille deck. As usual, I start by shuffling. And I'm going to be repeating my intention, inward balance, outward unity, softly to myself, maybe even out loud, and do that with me while we take some deep breaths and tap into the idea of flow. Okay, so once I've brought the deck from chaos back into unity, I can peacefully begin to draw my cards. The first card that I draw is in the dead center, and it is the self-fulfillment position. The card that I draw in the self-fulfillment position is the Knight of Pentacles reversed. When I see the Knight of Pentacles reversed, usually what I see is the potential inability to connect with deeper parts of existence. In the case of self-fulfillment, the way that I see the Knight of Pentacles, especially with that interpretation, is this idea that what we need to be fulfilled is a connection to those 4 elements, to all of the elements of the earth. And not just a superficial connection, but an actual deep connection. So not just this idea of, how can I utilize everything the earth has to offer to create something for myself? I think here it's saying, how do I engage with everything the earth has to offer? In all of its depth, and all of its beauty, and all of its gifts. How do I engage with those things to create something bigger than myself? To create something with a deeper meaning. And in terms of self-fulfillment, I think this card in the self-fulfillment position is saying that we will be fulfilled if we can unite all of these elements. Again, if we can go on that journey this week with the moon through each of these elements and really tap into what those mean, while still trusting ourselves, but again, bringing detailed focus onto each element. How do we inject passion into each element? And then how do we flow through all of them to fulfill ourselves, to fulfill our goals? This week we need to reflect on that. Let's see what the rest of the cards say and how they can inform this. So now we'll begin our journey through the elements with the cards. And the first card that I'll draw is in the Taurus section of security. And the card that I draw here is the 8 of Swords. The 8 of Swords, in the position of security, in the position of Taurus, this is our earth sign, so our connection with the earth element, and how that can bring us security. Here, in the 8 of Swords, we see self-defensiveness. The way that I look at that in terms of, like I said, in terms of being self-defensive, the 8 of Swords can also be this idea that we potentially are locking ourselves into something. So if it's security, I think maybe this is speaking to a false sense of security. I think this is speaking to focusing on the wrong aspect of our approach to being secure. I think, again, we're maybe misperceiving what keeps us actually safe. We may feel secure in some kind of ignorance. We may be blinded to the idea that we are actually free in a situation that maybe feels like we're not. But I think ultimately, it speaks to self-defensiveness. And I think we might be giving too much into the idea of protecting ourselves from something that maybe we don't understand. And that this week is about going with the flow, being open enough to let details and passion unite. And I think in terms of inner balance, outward unity, if we're locked into something just because we're afraid, we're never going to be able to really review who we are. We're never going to be able to really accept our honest sense of self, our most unique self. But that full moon is calling for this week. I think we need to understand with this card that there is something we are blinding ourselves to because we think we're safe in it. But actually, if we freed ourselves, if we took off the blindfold, we would realize that we actually are in a much more secure place with our eyes opened. And I think that's what this card is saying. And maybe that eyes opened approach is the idea of turning our eyes to a reflection of our approach to details. Freeing ourselves with enough force, enough intention, so that we can realize, oh, I'm unique, I'm amazing. And oh, now that the blindfold's off, I can see all of these beautiful details that can help me bring a passion and a flow to my life. But we can't do that if we're blindfolded and closed off and think we're trapped in something we're actually not. And we would see quite easily if we just started taking the blindfold off, looking at the details. So I'm approaching that. Let's move on. So the next card that I draw is in the position of Leo, pleasure. And this is our fire sign. So we're moving from earth into fire. In this position, I draw the Fool reversed. So for me, when I see the Fool reversed, I usually think about recklessness. But also taking chances. Maybe blindly taking chances, which again, we're talking about getting our blindfolds off in the last card. And so I think that it's important to not be blinded. I think what this card is telling me is that we need to find pleasure in risk-taking. That we are being called to take chances and feel good about it. So how I want to tie this into detail-oriented focus, because remember, the balance, the inner balance that we're talking about is balancing a detail-oriented focus with passion, injecting passion into detail-oriented focus. I want us to analyze in detail the times where we felt the most pleasure from taking a risk. Do a little inner review of your past and pinpoint where you felt, literally when you felt the best about having taken some kind of risk. I don't think this card is calling for us to take a risk, but I do think that it's calling for us to review a moment when we did that and it felt good. I think that's what the pleasure part of this Leo position is telling us about. Now let's move on to the next card, which is Scorpio and passion. So different from pleasure, we're at passion. And this is us moving from fire to water. So here, in a similar vein as pleasure with Leo, because Leo can also be passionate, but because it's Scorpio, because it's water, we're talking about a deeper emotional passion. A passion that comes from a more emotional context. And that's how I want us to apply that, again, balancing passion and detail. I want us, in this case, to think about passion not as just pleasure and fire, but as emotion and water. I want us to think about the balance of those two elements to describe a similar concept. How that can combine with a detail-oriented approach. Again, free of our blindfold, free of our false imprisonment, free of our embracing of ignorance, free of that. I want us to figure out what, by this card, which we'll draw soon, how we can bring passion into this equation. So let's check out what that card is. The card that I draw in the Scorpio passion position in our water sign is the Page of Wands reversed. So the Page of Wands reversed is showing a relationship with complexity. And whether or not we are able to engage with that complexity is going to be parallel with our ability to engage with passion. our ability to engage with also pleasure. To go back a little bit to the other card. It's wands. It's the page of wands. So we are, even though we're in a water sign, we are still talking about fire. It's a balance here. Balance of water and fire. If you can hold those two things in balance, you can find success in a lot of things. But here, if we're talking about what makes us passionate, I think this is a beautiful sign that we are capable, but we're certainly being called to. But I think we are capable of engaging with the complexity of balancing all of these elements, but also balancing passion and detail. Passion and a complex intellectual approach to reviewing. I think the page of wands reversed here is saying that things may not be so simple, they may be a little crazy, but we are able to delve into that complexity with a passion. And maybe even a pleasure. Maybe we can find that balance in there. What it's saying here is that we're ready either way. How I'm seeing it is that we are ready either way to engage with the complexity of combining all these elements, of combining passion and detail focus, with intellectualism as well. All of those things. Because the ultimate goal, remember, is to go with the flow. So because this is our water part, the water sign in our spread, I want to remind us at this point in the spread that going with the flow is the ultimate goal this week. So let's move on to the next card to bring in the air element and see how, again, our intellect and our focus come in to balance out or balance with the passion and pleasure. Let's check it out. The card that I draw in this section of the spread, and this position, is Aquarius, and it's altruism. And like I said, this is our air sign. So the card that I draw in the Aquarius position is the Page of Cups. The Page of Cups, for me, is about embracing imagination and intuition for their own sake. Engaging with and completely giving ourselves over to fantasy for fantasy's sake. How does that tie into what we've been talking about? How does that tie into altruism? Well, for me, because our intention was inward balance, outward unity, I think this is saying, you've been talking about all this detail focus. You've been talking about pragmatism and intellectualism and your own personal uniqueness. But we've also been talking about combining all of that with passion and going with the flow. But I think this card is showing us that the best thing we can do, in spite of all of that, if we really are free and have taken off that blindfold, if we really have engaged with pleasure and passion and combine those things with a detail-oriented approach, the best way to start this journey and the best way to help ourselves and others and the best way to maintain balance is by embracing imagination and intuition and fantasy for their own sake. I find this very exciting. I tend to be a little bit wary of focusing too much on details. I'm really excited about this review period because personally, I want to get better at engaging with details. But when I see something like imagination is actually the way to lead the way, I love that so much. Because if I can orient my focus on detail into my imagination, almost into my dreamscape, if I can do that, if I can really tap into that, if I can treat the thing I need to focus on, if I can treat my imagination as if it's a thing I need to focus on, my inner world, if I can focus on that in detail, inject passion, inject pleasure, inject a sense of security as well, but only through freeing myself. If I can do that, but lead with imagination, lead with an intuitive focus on my own visions, maybe even my own fantasies. That's how I see combining passion with detail. That's how I see an inner balance. And because this was an altruism position, I instantly then find that that balance is the best way to be altruistic. If I find that inner balance, that is the best thing I can do to have the most positive impact outside of myself. And I find that to be incredibly beautiful. So this week, that's what I'm going to embrace. I'm going to embrace this inner balance. I'm going to look at it as a fun journey. I'm going to let that full moon shine on my unique identity. And I'm going to embrace that to the fullest. And then I'm going to let both of those things give me an idea of how I can have the most positive impact on everything outside of myself. All of that is how I can impact myself positively inwardly. But if I do that, I can have the most impact in an outward way as well. And that's my hope. And that is my intention. And that is what I'm going to be approaching during this time of review. How can I ensure that I find the best way during my review to be balanced inside? To provide the most unity, the most pleasure, the most passion, the most security, and be the most altruistic to everything outside of myself as well. And I hope you do too. I hope you guys have an amazing, amazing week. Thank you so much. See you next time.